Welcome to the Calgary Sessions. I'm your host, Jeff Humphreys. This is episode number 33. Today's guest is sitting in front of me because of a mutual friend, Mr. Laval St. Germain. Some might say he's Canadian royalty. I probably agree.
I agree. Yeah,
So introduce yourself, name, and what you're up to.
my name's Pete Hockenhull, and I guess what brings me here anyways, or what makes me an interesting Calgarian, or that would at least have Laval think that I'm worthy of it, it would be almost entirely cycling. So I host a podcast called Adventure Audio that I host with Tyler Hamilton, who's an ex-US professional road racer.
Yep.
And we started that a couple of years ago. That's how I met Laval.
Okay.
And I've had the opportunity to just interview some super incredible people. I was never a pro, never even tried to be a pro, but am a super avid amateur athlete. And then I also, subsequently from doing that, as these things happen, I also host another podcast that's very specifically about Everesting, which I think Laval told you about his Everesting on Revelstoke, which was brutal. So we can get to that too. So that's and I do, I did an Everesting this past August, ridden double centuries, and that's kind of my thing is ultra endurance cycling.
Cool.
And talking about it as much as I can.
Which is awesome. So I think this is the first time that I've actually had a podcast host. So it'll be like the double host show, which will be interesting because usually as the host, you just sit there and ask questions. So
it's a different dynamic, right? Like it's like a dance. Like somebody has to lead a little bit. So I'll try and not lead.
Well, it'll be cool though, because I think and right before we got on camera, we just started BSing about how small our circle is, and our circles seem to be very small. Like they're very close,
super small.
Which will just make this really cool because I think it's going to go all over the place. That makes for the best shows.
Yeah, like I guarantee that you let me into a club at some point.
Totally.
Like 20 years ago. Definitely, yeah. Or serve me drinks or whatever, yeah.
So yeah, man, you've listened to a bits of a few shows, so you kind of know the gist. I just like the guests. I like to take the guests back as far as they want to go. Just we all kind of grew up in a certain way. Things at a certain age started kind of resonating with us, whether it's lifestyle, athletics, family, work, like anything. So just go back to a point where you're kind of comfortable, where things started to click, and we'll take it from there.
Well, like to go right to the beginning, I'm a born and raised Calgarian. So I was born in 79 here, and my brother was born in 77. My parents moved here from Montreal just a few years before that. I think at that time they thought like they'd be here for a couple of years and go back, but never did, like a lot of people. So we grew up in Strathcona.
No way.
Yeah.
So did I.
Did you?
Yeah.
No shit.
Yeah.
The world gets out.
Here we go.
Again. Okay, whereabouts? We were on Stratford Place, so off of Strathcona Boulevard, where
like down the big hill, like what?
Way down the big hill. So where
you
now?
Come in, turn left, and go down by the schools.
Yeah, if you're coming in off 69, yeah, you turn left at where Olympic Heights is now. It wasn't there at the time, and then go down, I guess, like maybe 5 or 6 streets, and then we'd be on the right-hand side backing the ravine.
Okay, so down the hill, past Olympic Heights wasn't there. Your first left, Strathbury Bay.
No kidding.
There's a rock right there.
Yeah,
and it's been there forever. Back in the day, if we could
sandstone
get to the top,
rock.
Yeah, right there. You turn left to go right there.
Okay, so that is hilarious. So we lived there from like 83 to 90. Maybe like 90 or something like that. 90, maybe more like 10 years, maybe 93 or something. Then we lived in Scenic Acres for a while. And then when I was moving out, I eventually found my way back to the Southwest. But
so funny, dude.
That is funny. What school did you go to? What elementary?
I went to St. Mike's.
Okay, I went to Westgate. So
that's Catholic.
Yeah, I ended up going to Catholic school in high school, but but Westgate at first. So that's why we.
Yeah,
that's the only thing keeping the circle from getting a little bit tighter.
Because your brother's 77, same as me, so we would have, if we were both,
you'd have been in the same grade.
Same grade.
Yeah, totally. That's funny.
Yeah, my dad built the house in Strathcona in 81, and they're still there today.
No kidding. Mm-hmm. My brother still lives there now. Now he lives he lives like 2 blocks from the community center.
Crazy.
Yeah, that is. Okay, small world again. So Strathcona, back when 69th was like not a dirt road, but it was like a chip road. Like it was the end of the world.
Yeah, there's the bus loop, and that was it.
That was it.
That was the end of the line.
City. So I know that dates us now, but that was it.
It's awesome.
Now it's this major road, and it's just like keeps going and going.
Totally.
So and then just like everybody else, I like rode bikes as a kid and stuff, but it didn't really like take hold and become like a big part of my life until like really early adulthood, I think Mike, my brother, bought his first like real mountain bike, like a nice specialized mountain bike when he was like 19 and I was probably 17.
Yep.
And then like the next summer, you know, he had been badgering me to like save money, buy a bike, buy a bike. And I did. And then it was just like, it's been on ever since.
Just like that.
Totally.
Hooked.
Totally hooked. Yeah. With some periods of time where I did a lot of running and stuff because it was more like this predates like people thinking that riding in the winter was a sensible thing to do, right?
Yep.
Like or indoor trainers or anything like that. So there was a number of years there where I got into a good Canadian cycle of getting really fit in the summer and then getting a little lazy and out of shape and spending too much time in nightclubs and stuff during the winter and then getting back into shape in the spring. So after like 2 years of that, I pretty quickly took up running in the winter, right? So then I'd kind of be in this cycle of at least keeping fit. So, I mean, I would say that to categorize it fairly, I'd say that I like running, but I love cycling, if that makes sense.
Yep.
Yeah.
So when you're kind of, you know, you're going through junior high and high school, you're athletic dudes. Were you doing everything or were you kind of just like doing individual things?
I was very active in the sense that I loved being outdoors and like running around and exploring and like being on the move all the time.
Yep.
And loved being in the mountains at any chance or opportunity we got. But I played soccer and a little bit of football in high school, but I didn't have something that like clicked and made me obsessed.
Yep.
But it's funny to reflect because I do remember like seeing back in the old days when they would like broadcast like the Boston Marathon or like Ironman from Kona, like on the Wide World Sports, like way back in the day. And just as a little kid and being just completely captivated by endurance sports. But I never really I like cross country running and stuff I loved it. Like in the fall, like that was great. But I never really thought about like that's like a whole world out there. But I knew that I was like totally fascinated by it. Yeah, the people could just go all day. Like it was amazing to me. You know,
back then they were kind of underground sports, right?
Way more.
Like it's just
super fringe.
Yeah,
super fringe.
So
where it was like back then, it was like accepted that you got to middle age and you got heavier and it was just like part of life, and that's bullshit.
Yeah.
It really is.
Yeah, that's not reality anymore. So when you the first bike you bought, was it a mountain bike, road bike, or like where's your cycling career kind of start?
Yeah, I love geeking out on this part of it because it has evolved and grown into different directions. But it was mountain biking for sure that started it all. So it was a specialized rock hopper. No, that's not true. I bought a GT first and I only had it for a year and then was immediately down at Bocycle to upgrade it in the old store. That was the last bike I bought at the old store where there was like, remember they had the nicer bikes? It was like 7 steps up and that's where the nicer bikes was. I bought my GT on the first floor and I bought my Specialized on the second floor.
Remember where you bought it from? You know, like was it Fransky or was it Brian?
I don't remember who it was. I don't think it was one of the partners. I think it was just an employee, not just an employee. I think it was an employee, not a partner, who might not still be there. But I remember the bike vividly.
Saved up for it?
Totally.
Did you have a job? Were you working?
I did, yeah. So like right when I graduated from high school, I started working. Like I work in the car business.
Okay.
And I worked at Stadium Nissan, so like right across from McMahon.
Was that your first job?
That was like I had jobs in high school. I worked at the Crowfoot Car Wash Company, which was a brutal job.
Like at a car wash bay?
No, like a drive-through car wash, like almost like Johnny Rockets.
Yep.
Right.
Oh, so you were like hand washing and drying?
Hand washing cars in high school.
You were working.
Working. Totally. Hard work.
Yep.
We'd move the grates out at night because it had this long trench and it would just get filled with like soap and dirt and we needed to shovel it out. Like it was work.
What made you get a job at that age? Was that parents driving you or did you have
that was me.
Because you wanted things?
Totally. Yeah.
Wanted what?
Ooh, that's a good question. I don't know. But as soon as I was able to work, I was trying to work.
Sneakers? Did you want like video games? Did you want like, or you knew you needed money to do things?
I guess so. Yeah, I guess so. Or there's just some innate ambition, like, or just maybe it's just part of North American culture. Like you work, you need to earn, you need to acquire. Like, I don't know. I'm not a materialistic person. But
no
I
pressure?
definitely.
There's no pressure from your parents. It's like, it's time to get a job.
No, they loved that I did. They definitely loved that I did because not a lot of like high school boys are willing to get up at 6 o'clock in the morning on a Saturday and go wash cars all day, right?
Yeah.
Like, so, and I was willing to do it and put in the work. And it was hard because sometimes you know what it's like to be in high school. Sometimes you're out late with your buddies doing things you shouldn't be doing.
Yeah, Edworthy Park, wherever.
Yeah, and then you're on 2 or 3 hours of sleep and you're dragging your ass to work. But I did it, saved up money, bought that bike, and was like totally hooked.
How much was it?
It was $11.99.
I was going to say $1,100,
which was like a big deal.
That was the number back then.
That was a big deal. Yeah. And it was 26-inch wheels, hardtail. It probably had like 90 millimeters of travel, maybe like 1.85 tires, front disc, like a first generation disc brakes.
No way.
Heavy. Like it was probably like a 33, 34 pound bike.
Work to get that thing.
Loved it. And I didn't just mountain bike on it. Like we would drive to trails and mountain bike. And then right when I moved out of my parents' house, I lived in ranch land, so I'd ride to Nose Hill and explored every piece of single track in there. But I would just ride it. Like I would ride it everywhere. I got to friends' houses, my girlfriend's house. Like I just rode it everywhere. Streets, pathways, single track, whatever. I just rode the shit out of that bike.
And only for a year?
That bike? No, I probably had that bike for 2 or 3 years.
Okay.
And then who is now my brother-in-law, so he and I are married to sisters. When he met my now sister-in-law, it just turned out that he was also into cycling. But his dad had been really into road cycling. So Jason mountain biked and road cycled. And he was like, you should get a road bike because then we can go do the Golden Triangle together. And I was like, what's that? So then I learned all about that.
What is it?
So you ride from Castle Junction. The Elbow Valley Cycling Club puts it on. They still do. I think it's every May long weekend. So that's dicey as it is, right? Canadian totally. May long weekend. So you ride from Castle Junction to Radium. Okay. Day 1. Day 2, you ride from Radium to Golden. And then Golden back to Castle Junction.
Right.
So
how long is that?
It's like 330 kilometers over 3 days.
Okay. So
it's a pretty big bike ride. It's a lot of work. And I'd never done like multi-day stuff like that.
Yep.
So off we went and we did it. And I couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe that I'd ridden 300K.
What'd you ride?
3 days in a row. I bought another road bike. I bought a road bike.
For that
specifically for that. And then was totally hooked on road cycling. Also bought that at Bow. This is like two or 3 years later.
What was it?
That was in the new store and it was a Specialized LA. So it was like aluminum, but it had a carbon seat post, carbon fork. I bought Mavic Axiom wheels for it.
So you spent some money.
I did. Yeah.
And so
and I was like fully in.
Like empty the bank account to buy this thing?
No, I lived with my girlfriend at the time, who's now my wife. So I think I was a little more responsible than that. But we were like double income, no kids at that time. And she actually prodded me. She's like, if you want a road bike, like you work your ass off, go buy a road bike. Cool. Things were easier back then. Yeah. It doesn't go like that now totally. When I want to build a new bike. But
the decision process was quick.
And then, but I specifically remember that ride because this is like the full circle story to how long it takes to talk yourself into like ultra stuff from like other hard stuff. I remember Jason and I sitting at this like dumpy hotel in Radium.
So leg one and leg one.
Yep. And I was like, man, I can't believe we did that. And we were riding down like, that big drop into Radium.
I was going to say going up to the top though.
It's tough.
Yeah.
Well, you start with Storm Mountain Pass, right? Yeah. And then you have a long stretch of like relatively.
I drive that road all the time.
So you know it.
I'm not crazy enough to ride the road.
Well, the ride's not bad. I mean, the ride's survivable. It's just the traffic now. It's a bit tough. You need to pick it on the right day. But like it was pouring rain. We were freezing. We rode directly to the liquor store, loaded up, and then the sun finally came out. And Jason said to me, we were drinking scotch, and he's like, I've heard that people do this whole thing in a day. Some people. And I was like, get the fuck out of here. Like nobody can do this in a day. Like that sounded totally insane to me. But it turns out that people can.
And have you done it?
I haven't done that ride in a day, but I've ridden that far in a day. Yeah.
So it's possible.
It is definitely possible.
So
yeah, I did it twice last summer.
No way.
Yeah.
So
it is. You just got to ride all day. And like there's normal people all day, which is get up, have breakfast, ride, and then have dinner. Yeah. That's the normal person all day. When I say ride all day, I mean like ride all day, like
damn near 24
day. Yeah. So 17 to 24 hours. And then you can ride really, really far.
So, and so just, to give you a little context. So, cause this really interests me, the amount of cycling you do and what you're up to. Cause last year was 2 years ago was my first kind of year of getting into cycling. I bought a Cervelo C2 off of Kurt.
Nice.
So before that, I had a Jake the Snake.
Awesome.
2001 Jake the Snake that I kind of had for 19 years. And one year I rode like 1,300 clicks. I was like, oh, this is kind of fun. You know, this feels fun. So the next year I started and was riding again. And I was like, nah, I need to upgrade. So I bought the Cervelo and I rode 6,000 kilometers that year.
That's a big year.
And then last year I did 7,100. So I'm like, you know, I'm not nearly in your world, but I totally appreciate what you do on a bike. This is what gets me going because it's very interesting to hear how you're thinking about this. So, you know, doing that first Golden Triangle one, are you literally just in the saddle, just like, I got this? Or is it a dead grind for 3 days?
Yeah, it definitely got grindy, especially on day 3, because then you've got 2 days in your legs. And again, I'd never done anything like that before. I'd ridden my old hardtail mountain bike one time around the city. I rode 100K one time.
Which on that old school bike?
Totally. I couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe it. My brother and our best friend Bernie were sitting in our living room at the time, and I got home and I just like collapsed in the living room, and I was solo, totally by myself, and on a whim, like with $20, stopped at a couple of 7-Elevens, and
you're like, I have some time. Here's a very loose number. I have a loose path.
Yeah,
I'm gonna see if I can do this.
I was pretty sure that if I rode from ranch lands and sort of circumnavigated a bunch of the east part of the city and rode all the way across Fish Creek and then kind of like looped back, I was pretty sure it'd be around 100K. And it was. And I just had like the old cat eye odometer with like a wired, and, you know. So I'd only done that once. So then I did 2 days, and we're sitting and then riding from Golden back towards Castle Junction. But there's some big hills, like past spiral tunnels and stuff. So it was grindy. But it's pressure over time. That's what I realized on that very first trip. It's just like you just continue to apply pressure towards the task, and then it's only a matter of time. You just keep pouring energy into it, which means fuel in your body and turning pedals. And it's amazing.
Which makes sense. The fuel part, that's the wild card, right?
Big time.
You can go out on that adventure, and if you're not fueling, is it possible to still accomplish it? Was there not enough hours in the day to get there?
You know, you need to have a smarter person talk to you about the nutrition and what the body does. Yeah. But the short answer is yes. You can, because your body will eventually convert to burning fat. And even if you're pretty lean, you've got days and days of calories just hanging on your body. Yep. And your body will figure it out. It won't just stop. It'll eventually convert to burning fat. Is it optimal for performance? No. Like if you're trying to make time on something, you need to continue to feed it carbs. Right. You need like that flat. It's like somebody once explained it to me. The difference is like fat is like those embers that burn down really, really, really hot in a fire that take like 2 hours to put out because they just are burning so much. But carbs are like the newspaper that you're throwing on top of it. And it's making quite a display, right? Yeah. Ultimately you need both. But yeah, to answer your question, you could, but really you should continue to keep fueling, but not too much. And you need to figure all that stuff out.
Totally. It's a science.
Totally it is.
That 100-kilometer ride around Calgary, what you touched on earlier, just you could see these kind of endurance sports as something. Was that the trigger? You're like, how far can I go? Like what? Because there wasn't a lot of, the pathway system wasn't what it is right now. So to pull off 100, took some creativity, right?
Yeah. I mean,
were you bored? Did you want to prove anything? Was it just
really
a test?
Simplistic? It was a test. Yeah. The first time I rode 43 kilometers, I wondered if I could ride 50. And the first time I rode 50, I wondered if I could ride 75. And it still hasn't really.
I was going to say, that hasn't stopped?
It still hasn't really stopped, I guess. So it sort of came from there, but I remember it well though, because it was totally on a whim.
Dude, because I got a story very similar.
And we'd been out partying the night before, and I woke up hungover, and I was like, enough of this. I'm gonna ride 100K, and off I went, literally with $20 in my cycling shorts and
Where'd you stop? Where was your pit stops? Do you remember?
7-Elevens. There was like 3 7-Elevens.
What'd you eat?
Yeah, it was just water, and I mean, food was pretty cheap 20 something years ago. And I think power bars were pretty much like the thing back then. Yeah.
So funny, man. Because
I just grinded it out, and I was a bag of shit when I got back. I was ruined
for a couple of days. Day at least, like it took you a while.
Oh yeah, at least a day. Yeah, I could feel it. Like pedaling squares is the cycling expression, right? Where you feel like your wheels aren't even round anymore. You're just so tired.
Torture.
Yeah.
I went on a ride, and I don't know what it was, and I was And I think I had an old, I might have been on my Jake the Snake, and I don't know what I did, 25 kilometers, 30 kilometers, nothing crazy. And anyways, no fuel, no nothing. And I remember going around, doing the res and going somewhere else, and I was coming back up 37th Street, and there's a 7-Eleven on 37th Street right by Mount Royal.
Yeah, I know where you mean.
And I was there's like a little incline to get there out of the res, and my legs both started cramping. So I limp into 7-Eleven, buy 2 chocolate bars.
Out of the Weaselhead Hill, you mean.
Totally.
Yeah.
So I crushed 2 chocolate bars, my legs kind of come back, and then I ride the last 25 minutes home. But the 7-Eleven pit stop was my, as soon as you said that.
But you realize how sugar can save
get you going
in
quickly.
a pinch, right? Yeah, for
Totally.
sure. Yeah.
So after your university, you go to university? Are you doing that?
No, I was working right away, and then I went to Mount Royal College part-time while I was working because I didn't want to not go. And I'm glad I did. It honestly didn't really change the outcome of my career trajectory a whole lot, but it was nice I worked at a car dealership, so it was nice to hang out with people my age. Everybody was like 40, and I was like 18, 19, 20, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
And the job at the dealership was just by chance? You know somebody? Or
sort of by chance. My dad was a commercial real estate broker, and he did some work with Jack Carter. So you remember Jack Carter?
Yep.
That was at the time was Jack Carter Chev Olds. That was when Oldsmobile existed. So that was on the corner of Glenmore and McLeod. They've since moved. So one of Jack's partners opened Stadium Nissan. His name was Lawrence Bates, and that's why I started working there at first. And then Lawrence kind of just was like my work dad, and his 2 sons were like older brothers to me, and I worked there for a long time.
Cool.
Yeah. So it's great.
Cars. Is there a connection with cars in your world? Between washing cars and working at a car dealership?
Sort of. I mean, I don't. Yeah, I was a pretty typical North American teenage boy. I loved cars. I loved reading about cars. Loved reading Motor Trend and Road and Track, and I would go to the library and read all of them, and was totally into and I loved car dealerships. I loved just the buzz and new models out and all the time. Cars I love the business, but it has changed because they become, after so much time, they do become a little bit of a commodity rather than right? Yeah. It's hard to look at cars as to not just what's it worth, what could it sell for, right? Wholesale retail, it's hard to separate that a little bit. They don't have the same sense of adventure attached to them as bicycles do to me.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, cars have been around and sort of important for a long time too. Yeah, in a different way. So
the dealership job, you're just kind of you're working there, obviously full time.
Yeah.
Mount Royal a little bit.
Mount Royal 2 nights a week.
Yep.
Working at the store full time, a lot, 50, 60 hours a week. But looking back, I still feel like I had a lot of free time, which is funny because when you've just moved out, it's you really only have to answer yourself. Yep. If you don't feel like tidying something up that day, you don't. And you know what it's like when you first leave the nest. Yeah. So yeah, I mean, I was either working or going to school or riding bikes. And it's pretty much still the same thing except for school, but I'm either working or doing something in service to my family and my kids, or I'm riding bikes.
And the biking back then, could you keep track of kilometers like you can on Strava now?
No, but it's funny that you ask because there's obviously I can see that you have some of this personality if you specifically rode 7,100 kilometers in a year. That's a specific number. Totally. There's something about I think we all have we're all somewhere on a spectrum of mental health things, and everybody has a little bit of OCD.
Yep.
If you're a little more on this side of the spectrum, there's something about it's cycling and endurance sports where the kilometers and the elevation gain and the routing and looking maps and figuring things out and looking at trails and zooming in on Google Maps and so if something's gravel, that really appeals to cyclists, and even more so when you become an ultra cyclist. So yeah, Strava didn't exist.
No.
I've kept manual handwritten.
No way.
Cycling logs. You were back to, I didn't do it that early, but I probably got 10 years of that pre-Strava.
So you would set your cat eye, go out, whatever it said, 29, go to your book, right? 29
hours, mileage. So no elevation back then, right? Because I had no idea.
I
had no idea what I was riding for elevation. But time and mileage broken down weekly and then summarized monthly then summarized yearly.
Crazy.
No shit.
But you were into it.
Very.
And so you think it's when you said the OCD, we're on a spectrum, and the cyclist can be that way. What about when I look at it, I look at it from the lens of being able to just accomplish something, to be moving forward in a direction that you're always getting. The amount of work you're putting in you're seeing improvements. That's what I the reason why I said 71, like 6 to 71, because that's my improvement.
Totally.
Like, it's not a gauge of success. It's not a flex to the world to say this is my number. It's just, I know that I put in X amount of energy and it got me to here, which is my new baseline.
It sounds so corny, but I mean, it really is you versus you, right?
Yeah.
Like it all should be, because there's always going to be somebody who can kick your ass at something. So, I mean, it really should be you. Like, look at Kurt's mileage. Like, I can't aspire to that right now. I can't. But
so what is that? That's I know yours is.
I did 10,000 last year,
which is a big number.
Yeah, like it. I mean, it feels like it, and then you see somebody do 20, and you're like, shit.
So here's the scale. I'm at 71. You're at 10. Kurt's at 24. I know that 10 is out of my range because of my lifestyle. I have other things that I like to do in the summertime.
Yeah.
24 is never, I'd have to retire and just like stop doing everything to get there, which I don't want to do. So it's not, when people tell you what the number is, the only thing, what I think is you appreciate the amount of time and energy and dedication it takes to pull that number off.
Totally.
And it's not I'm stronger, I'm faster, it's just.
Yeah. It's also, well, first of all, to begin with, like to bring it all back to like, why would I be like writing that stuff down? Probably a little bit of OCD, but also to measure it, right? Like, can I improve on those things? Also, if you only focus on a metric like mileage, then you're not taking into account intensity or what kind of bike you're riding. Because somebody could ride 6,000 kilometers of single track and they could have rode way more hours than I did last year, right? Mine's a combination of gravel, indoors, road, and mountain biking. Yeah. So it's like kind of a mix, but there's people who ride more hours than me and fewer kilometers and vice versa, right? So like you can't, I don't know, you could chase that stuff all day and you drive yourself bananas, but I do like tracking things for the exact same reason, right? Kind of do a little more, a little better. Yeah.
Do you find that over the last, let's say 5 years, have you seen a gain every year on, let's just use kilometers, for example. Have you?
No.
Okay. So that doesn't matter to you?
It's ebbed and flowed. I mean, I have 3 kids.
Yeah, lifestyle, right?
Yeah, totally.
It's
hugely, right?
Like, to pull off 10,000 kilometers in a year, how many active days is that, and how many hours of riding is that?
It's like 340 active days. So I'm really consistent, where some people could ride the same mileage as me, but they could do it in like half as many days because they're just going like, no, every weekend I go for like a gigantic wander. Yeah. That's awesome too. My life's constructed in such a way right now where I need to be really judicious with my time. So sometimes it's pretty focused training because I can't go ride 350 kilometers in practice to go ride 3 or 350 kilometers, right? You need to be able to practice in a different way. Yeah. And I think that's just that applies to a whole bunch of different things, right? Like you don't need to do 20-hour bike rides to get ready to do a 20-hour bike ride. Well, and we can get into that science too, right?
Totally.
Like coaching and training, and because it's key. It works.
So are your goals, are they just based off of are your goals focused around events and challenges? And is that enough to drive you? And what about I'd love to hear your thoughts on the amount of hours you spend riding your bike by yourself and where your head goes and what that does for you.
Oh man. Okay. So two separate questions.
And again, this is like, that's why I wanted to give you context for what I do. Cause this is like all very interesting.
So the first one's about events and goals. Yeah, definitely. Definitely very event and goal oriented. Sometimes they're just completely by my own construct though. Right. So like my good friends Kelly and Dave and I decided last year that, hey, we're going to do a 200 miler. Like, because a 100 miler, like the century, that's kind of like the thing for cyclists, right? Like, can you do 100 miles? That's
160 clicks.
It's like the marathon. Yeah. Right. It's like the marathon of cycling. Can you do that? And I'm like, not a lot of people can say
it's a big thing, right?
200, right? Yeah. Doing a century is a big thing. Yep. I still remember my first one. People should be proud of that.
How long did it take?
To do the double?
To do the first one, the 100 miler?
Probably like 7 hours back then. Okay. Yeah, I was with a group and we rode, and then not a bunch of us. There was about 30 of us on a trip, and 6 or 7 of us decided to try and get 100 miles, like within 2 rides before and a ride the day after. Yep. But we did it, and then it started to really open up possibilities, right? And then it's pretty easy to start to talk about 200K. I mean, it's only another 40 kilometers, right? It's like an hour and a half. I can do it. So then you start to do those things. But events and goals for sure.
Because if kilometers are if your lifestyle kind of dictates how many clicks you can actually put on, what's the drive to keep doing it? Is it just to stay active? Is it towards the events?
That's definitely part of the drive for sure. Like to say that there's like there's a concern just for my overall health and longevity and well-being for sure.
Yep.
Also, just vanity and ego is for sure a factor. I think that people who work out a lot and say that that's not, are probably not being totally honest with themselves. Of course, like I like appearing fit and active.
Fit,
yeah, for sure. But events and stuff, no, that's just all about, can I do it? Right. So there's some inspiring events that I haven't been able to do yet, but like I hope to, like Leadville.
What's that?
It's a 100-mile mountain bike race in Leadville, Colorado.
Okay.
So it starts at 10,000 feet of elevation and goes up to, I can't remember, 12,500. So the whole event is high elevation. So that makes it really hard and unique in its own way.
Yep.
And then Everesting, I sort of became aware of that, like maybe 6 or 7 years ago. I'd heard of this challenge sort of in my periphery. And then it started getting some like mainstream buzz, like in Bicycling Magazine and like in Velo News and stuff like that. Like
so it's kind of recent,
started doing it. Well,
ish.
Yeah, like it only got sort of invented maybe 10 years ago.
So explain what it is, because there's not many people that are going to know.
Yeah, so for like lay people, the Everesting Challenge was sort of dreamed up by this guy named Andy Van Bergen in Australia. He lives in Melbourne, Australia. He's like totally a kindred spirit. And he devised these like hellishly long and brutal cycling challenges for he and like his local buddies who were all really into this. Like I think one of his uncles, maybe his dad, were into these like really, really extreme cycling challenges. And then Andy sort of started like masterminding them himself. So not just going out and doing other people's challenges, but like, what if we did this? And he'd propose it to his friends and they'd be like, oh my God, Andy, that's insane, right? And then they'd go and try and do it, and they often would.
Was there media coverage back then? Were they getting, was it magazines, or was it social, or what was it?
They did get some media coverage back then for sure. And Andy actually works for Cycling Tips, which probably helps.
Gotcha.
And then he had heard about George Mallory the second, or is he the third? George Mallory doing what he called an Everesting by bicycle in Australia. What that was to go up and down one hill until he'd reached the equivalent elevation of Mount Everest from sea level. So that's 8,848 meters. Doesn't matter what the hill is. It could be a driveway. It could be a mountain pass. It could be short. It could be steep. It could be shallow. It could be long, whatever. You just keep going up and down that same hill on the same route, right? You can't take a different way down. You can't take a car down. You can't take a tram. Like you're cycling up and down that hill until you've banged out the elevation. George Mallory, who first did that, was the grandson of George Mallory, who died on Mount Everest in 1924 with Sandy Irvine.
Crazy.
Right? So those are the two guys who a lot of people presume made it to the top, but didn't make it down. So that's how it sort of started. And then people started to hear about this in different parts of the world.
And you're just picking this up?
I'm like just kind of picking this up in the periphery, right?
And I'm thinking like maybe?
Well, so it's interesting how it's like sort of works into your head when you hear about something like this. Because at first, like when you're a cyclist, like when you hear that, like what's a tough hill in Calgary? I love that this is so local because we can talk about specific hills and like how does it translate, right? Like,
Edworthy's the end of my ride home every time.
Edworthy's the awesome local grind, right? Especially if you live in Strathcona, you know Edworthy Hill, right?
Yep.
It's kind of an icon, and it's a tough punch, right? It's Edworthy's 1.2 kilometers or 1.1, and it's like I'm going off the top of my head here. It's like 90 meters or something like that. So you need to do it. It's like 140 times or something. I can't remember exactly what the math is, but then you start to break it down to time, and you're like, oh, Edworthy would take like 18, 19 hours. Like then you're like, oh, because you just hear about the elevation and you're like, oh, that sounds like a lot, but you don't like, it's hard to contextualize it, right? Especially if you're not like always looking at your elevation gain in your rides.
Would be that, and the Highwood Pass from the south side to the top is 1,100-ish. So it's doing that.
That's out. You can't do it there. It's not nearly steep enough. It's
too long.
Way too long. You end up riding like 500 kilometers. Right. It's madness.
So that would take you.
It would take you 2 days probably, right? Where Edworthy's at least pretty steep, so you
Right.
can get it banked out, right?
Okay.
Right? Or COP.
Yep.
COP is another great,
Okay.
right? The switchbacks. So then I started to think about it in terms of like the hills that I know, right? Like I thought about COP and I thought about Edworthy. And truth be told, when I first heard about it, I was like, no way.
Because you did the math.
I did the math.
You're like 19 hours? No.
I did the math. And because I worked it out. Because at first you're like, okay, yeah, we could try that. And then you do the math and you're like, no. My first reaction to my buddy who told me about it was like, oh, I'd never do that if I had that much time to ride my bike. There's way cooler things you could do and stuff like that. But the truth was, like, deep down, I was like, I don't think I could do that. That's brutal.
And you were, when you were starting to hear about these things, you were riding a lot, right?
I was already riding a lot.
You were competent. You kind of like, you were a cyclist.
Yep, racing a bit, riding a lot.
Okay.
I'd done big days on the bike, and I was like, that's too much. Yeah.
So what changed? So which is so cool. Like the timing of this conversation is awesome because I want to know what changed, and then I want to know why you started a podcast around that.
I think that it's a pretty good story.
Awesome.
So, well, what changed, I guess, I had started Adventure Audio, and I did that with Tyler because he and I became friends because I used to run the Calgary and the Edmonton bike show. So there's the entrepreneur tie.
So, and
right?
why, and was there no shows and you just saw an opportunity, or what was it?
No, so Tyler had come up here and we did a couple of training camps in Banff. And we we hosted people and rode around and toured them and people who weren't familiar with the area and stuff like that. And we had so much fun. But like the most fun of the weekend was like this, right? It was like sitting around after having a beer, having a coffee in the morning, stopping part way and like the chats, right? And I could see that Tyler really loved that part too. And I loved the idea. Like I could talk about cycling and outdoor adventures and hikes and runs. Like I could talk about it all day. But you've done it. It's a scary thing to start a podcast, right? And I was like, it took pressure off to like have a co-host. So I asked Tyler, I said, hey, if I figure out like the technical side of like how to make this work, would you co-host it with me? And we'll do it remotely. He lives in Missoula, Montana, but then we can host people from anywhere, right? So he was like, okay. So we started it and it became a thing and people listen and it's super cool. And we got to talk to all kinds of awesome people, but we started in October 19. So we only podcasted for 5 or 6 months and then boom, pandemic hits, right? And the shit hits the fan. So we weren't able to do, we thought we'd do more camps and stuff. We haven't seen each other since. It's been 2.5 years, right? We haven't seen each other in person. We talk twice a week. But then we started interviewing because we're interviewing all these awesome endurance athletes, like this guy named Ryan Atkins from Quebec who set the Everesting record on foot on a local ski hill, like ran 8,848 meters. Because these super highly trained athletes suddenly have nothing to do, right? The race calendar's wiped clean. Everything's canceled for all of 2020. They all want something to do. They've all got a high fitness level and they're all wired like that. Like they're A-types, they're box checkers. Like they need something to do. So they're all like looking at this Everesting challenge thinking like, because it requires some specificity in your training. Like if you're like a track cyclist and you need like huge sprints and stuff like that, like you're not going to train to do an Everesting. It would screw up everything else that you're working on. But these really accomplished athletes had the opportunity to do it. And then it started coming up on the podcast because we'd be hosting these people and they were like, I'm getting ready for an Everesting, or I just tried an Everesting, or whatever, or my friend did one, they're trying to talk me into it. So then it sort of got on my radar. And then Tyler started, when we would host somebody, it kind of became an inside joke where he'd tease and he'd be like, oh, Pete's gonna do one. He's gonna try. And I'd be like, no, I'm not.
That can't be on record.
You do it, yeah. Like, but then it started to creep into my head, and then I started to do the math more, and then I thought, like, why not? Like, why not? Like, what's the worst thing that can happen? You don't make it. Like,
which hurts though.
Of course, but look, like, you got to take some risks, right? Like, you got to take some risks. The worst, once I started to like think about that. It's like my living doesn't depend on it. It's ultimately just a silly, frivolous, selfish thing to do. I'll just try. And if I make it to 5,000 or 6,000 meters, it'll be the most I've ever climbed in a day. Like, so I'll give it a go. Once I'd committed though, I'm like a lot of A-types. I had to check the boxes and cross my T's, dot my I's so that I had the best possible chance to actually do it. Right. So I fundraised for brown bagging for Calgary kids, which is an awesome local charity. They provide school lunches for kids that don't. And I'm like, I'm going to put as much external pressure on myself so that I could, like, I'm just so motivated to get it done. And that totally helped. Totally it did.
Just some extra pressure, a cause.
Completely. Talked about it on the podcast, fundraised, you know, and then when you've been doing it for 17 or 18 hours and you're like, what have I gotten myself into here? You have that well to dig into of like, I got to get this damn thing done.
So, which goes perfectly back to that question, what goes through your head when you're sitting in that saddle? I was thinking for like a 100K ride, but what happens when you're riding for 17, 19 hours?
The second part of your question.
But what, like I know what I think about, right?
All kinds of things, yeah.
If I ride 50 clicks, you know, it's the start of the day, it clears my head, it sets the table for everything that's going to happen that day, potentially the week, and potentially for the plans for the month. And for me, it's about my business, how I'm growing it.
Yeah.
What's happening.
It's amazing the clarity that comes when you're exercising. That's not just exclusive to cycling. You can be a paddler or whatever, but the clarity that comes from other parts of your life that you're not even intending to go focus on.
So,
but you come back with these ideas, right?
Totally. So my clarity, you know, after a couple hours of riding, I'm clear. Yeah. What happens when you're riding like for 6, 19, all these hours? Like, where's your head going?
Well, my shorter rides are exactly like yours. I'm thinking about work. I'm thinking about family schedule. I'm like, how am I going to get this one to hockey and that one to dance? And like, you know, and I'm kind of like working it all out in a very practical sense. Or if I'm training indoors, I'm often like replying to emails at the same time or whatever. Because it's like, if I want to do it all, then I jam some stuff in. And we can talk about it later, but I also think that the whole like concept of balance is kind of BS. You know, like, 'cause why would I be average at 15 things when I could be awesome at 4? You know, but but long ones, you do need to be prepared.
Do you have tunes in your ear? What do you do?
Yeah, breaks, right? So like I try and take some breaks. So I had people pop by, like on the Everesting in particular, but I've also done really.
Where was the Everesting one?
So that's another story, but I kind of, because I kind of.
Sorry, man, I'm taking you everywhere because my mind's just going.
The hill selection is a huge and very, very fun part of Everesting because you get to nerd out on that for a long time. You can just continue training, but then think about your hill, right? I don't want it too steep. What kind of gearing should I be using? Where's my turnaround point going to be? Is that safe? What's vehicular traffic like? Where can I set up my base camp, which is usually your car, which you've got stuffed with food and maybe extra wheels and tubes and maybe a bike, clothing,
maybe a stunt rider that can
everything that you think that you might need in like the desperate times, right? Like you've got it all packed in there. And hopefully somewhere accessible enough where you can have some people pop by and give you a little boost, right? So I had friends come in would ride some laps with me. Then I had like a 5 or 6 hour period in the midday where I was all by myself and I listened to a live REM concert and then a live hip concert just to like take myself somewhere else. You know, and you have to be prepared to play mental tricks because, and I just talked about this with somebody on the Everesting podcast. You are walking around with yourself and you've got your best friend who's always ridden with you everywhere, but he's a bit of a dick and he's a bit of a naysayer and is always trying to talk you out of stuff. And it's you. And even though you know that stuff is coming, there's no defense for it. It's coming. Like you can't shut the door on it. What you need though is when that thought comes in of like, why are you doing this? This is a waste. Like you're a father of 3. Like get it together. Like really, this is what you're doing with your spare time? Like this is a hard-earned weekend, and you're out here like killing yourself. Like why are you doing this stuff? You know that those things are coming, and you almost need your rebuttals like pre-prepared. Because as soon as you let that thought penetrate your head, like Laval will know about this in a deeper way than I ever will. You need to be able to talk back to it and put it in its place because it's coming. It is coming, and you need to be prepared for that stuff. So, and then late in the night, my wife, who's so supportive, came to check on me. I think it was like around 10:30 or 11 p.m. and I've been riding since 4 a.m. And I knew that I was off pace. I was off my intended pace, which I think is typical.
When were you supposed to finish?
I was hoping to finish by midnight, so 20 hours. And I was like, I knew there was no way. I was taking a little longer in the dark when I started than I thought. Having people come by to visit slowed me down. It was awesome to have people there, but I hadn't calculated in that stuff, right? Rookie mistake. So she shows up and it's dark again and I'm still trying to crank out laps, and each lap takes me somewhere between 9 and 10 minutes. So I come down and I can see her headlights and checks on me and how you doing? And she could tell I was pretty shattered. She didn't say it, but I could tell she could tell. And She's like, you know what? I'll just drive behind you for a couple of laps, is what she said, just so you can ride in the headlights and not worry about everything else that's going on. Because as soon as it got dark, hill selection, we'll get back to that in 1 second. Because it was dark and no city lights. Then the coyotes came out and the deer came out, and like I was descending pretty carefully because I was exhausted. So she started driving like 10 kilometers an hour, like up this hill, and she stayed there for 3.5 more hours.
Champion.
Total champ. Had to work the next day.
Did you finish with her?
I did.
Awesome.
She was there when I finished, and so was our good friend Ken King, who showed up at, I don't know, like midnight or something with coffee, and so he's like, well, I'll keep Christina company, and they sat in the car. But late, then that's when my mind really started to play tricks on me and go places. And you do start to hallucinate. But you don't hallucinate in like I'm sure you do. I'm sure Laval's hallucinated. I'm sure I've heard of people like seeing like cartoon dinosaurs and like really tripping out. But I just started to like see like shapes in the headlights that weren't actually there and stuff. So it was like the beginning stages. And I'm sure it would have turned into cartoon animals later. But that starts to happen too.
Crazy.
And you need to just kind of start like recentering yourself as much as you can.
Sounds horrible.
I mean,
so what happens when you finish? Besides being exhausted,
it's so anticlimactic.
Yeah.
You turn off your ride on your computer or your phone or however you're tracking it. You hope that it uploads into Strava properly and saves. Because oh my God, you don't want to have to do it twice. And then make sure that you hit the necessary elevation, and that was it. And there's the three of us. We're on this country road. The hill that I did it on is called Wild Rose Hill. It's on a lower Springbank Road, right across the street from that funeral home, Lower Springbank Road. And it's a dead end road. It just goes up, pointing north, and it goes past like maybe 7 huge Springbank mansions.
Yeah, okay. So you go past the funeral home, and then take your right.
It's like the next right.
And you go up there?
Yeah, there's a bank of mailboxes there. That's where I parked my car. It was kind of a nice wide turnout.
And you went to the top?
And I went to the top where it's a cul-de-sac, and I would turn around and come back down, and I did it 119 times.
Oh, shit.
I got to the top one time, and there's these 2 ladies having a glass of wine, neighbors up at the top in the cul-de-sac, and they've obviously had a bit of wine, and they're like, hey, good for you. I used to do that 5 times a week when I would ride back from work. And I was like, good for you. And then we get to chat. I didn't say anything. They're like, how many times are you doing it? We've seen you up here a few times. I'm like, 119. And they're like, get out of here.
Different.
Yeah.
It's so funny. I know that area very intimately. My dad built a house out there for a close family friend that he worked for 30 years. Okay. So I spent a lot of time working on that job.
And if you road cycle, you know where I'm talking about, because that's where people road cycle in Calgary, or in the west side of Calgary anyways.
Are you going to do another one?
Well, that leads back to the whole, like, how did I get into the Everesting podcast? Because like most people who do something that exhausting.
Did you start it after or before?
After.
After you did it?
After I did it.
And then you're like, so where's your head at? You're like, are you seeing other people talking about it? You've now experienced it, and you feel like you can have a voice in the community?
Yeah, kind of. I mean, it didn't happen that fast. It did happen fast, but my thought process wasn't that. I didn't jump to that right away. The very first thing I thought of was like, I was so relieved that I did it, and I was never going to do that again.
Yep.
Totally. Which is a completely normal evolutionary reaction. We aren't hardwired to crave doing something like that again immediately after we do.
Yeah.
But we have all these cool chemicals that happen in our brain that sort of numb the unpleasant parts of that experience and sort of highlight the pleasant parts of it. And that's how we start to talk ourselves back into doing these things. So after I did it, I was so stoked and so relieved. And then I communicated with Andy, the founder of Everesting. And I asked him, I was like, well, and I'd hosted him on my podcast. And I was like, why isn't there an Everesting podcast? Andy's a really charismatic, affable guy, and he should do it, is what I said. Like, you should host the Everesting podcast. He's like, no, I don't have like the bandwidth for that. Like, we should have one. It could be commercial, but we'd need a host. He's like, you'd be perfect. And then the fateful words. And then we got to talking, and then I think we launched it like a month later. And I swear to God, one of my biggest hesitations was that I knew I'd need to do another Everesting. I can't host that podcast and like be one and done. I've got to do another one. So I am planning another one. They have a different version of that challenge, which is called a 10K roam. So you don't do 8,848 meters, you do 10,000 meters. So it's more. You have 36 hours to do it. So it's timed, which is unlike Everesting, which you can take as long as you need to do. but you can sleep, which is also unlike Everesting. Everesting, you can't sleep. But
Gotcha.
within this 36-hour period, and you need to ride a minimum of 400K in 36 hours. So 400K, 10,000 meters of elevation. You can sleep, but you probably don't want to sleep much because you need a lot of that time to be moving, right? So if you live in different parts of the world, you might have an opportunity to like actually plan a route that would give you the necessary elevation and mileage because they have steep enough roads in Europe. We don't have roads like that here. You can't do it without repeats. So my options are either to travel or to do a lot of repeats somewhere, right? So I don't want to travel for it. It's hard. Like it takes away a lot. And if I do travel, I don't want to just see a couple of hills. Right? Like I want to experience a little bit more than that. So right now I'm going to try and plan out, and I should talk to you, Kurt, Laval, about this because I want to try and pick like the 10 hardest hills sort of between Cochrane and Calgary, like the icons for cyclists, like Edworthy, like COP, like Glen Eagles, get like 10 of them and do 1,000 meters each and do all the riding in between them. Right. So however many repeats it takes to get 1,000 on this hill.
And then go to the next one.
And ride to the next one, get 1,000 meters on that hill, and then ride to the next one, and then sleep somewhere in between, and then get up and then finish it. So I'll start at like 7 a.m. on a Saturday and hopefully be done by 7 p.m. on Sunday.
Gross. Like it's just, those numbers are so massive. Like they're really crazy. And I ride enough to know they're crazy. I just don't. Yeah, I don't know what it just wired, but it's just a passion, right? It's people that do crazy things, whatever they love.
I think so. It's like, again, back to that balance comment. Like, I guess I could be average at things, but I don't know. Like, it's like when somebody asked Stephen King why he writes such scary stories, and he said, like, what makes you think I have a choice? It's like, that's what's in my head. That's what I write. Like, I don't know. I guess I can't really answer that. No, there's this like innate desire to push a little harder and kind of see what's around the next corner, right? Mentally even. Yeah.
And I think that's what it is. I think, the way you started this whole conversation of, just like putting in the energy and you're going to accomplish it. I can agree with it, but I'm just like, sometimes you're just physically not capable of doing things. And I'm wondering when that breaking point is. Like I'm sure you were thinking.
There is a breaking point. Like there has to be, right? There has to be.
Well, maybe it's the next one, but maybe not,
it's the next
maybe
one.
Not.
Yeah. There's also like, the margins are so thin on a challenge like this, especially when it's timed, that that's why I call it an attempt, right? Like there's no guarantee that'll do, because it could be a mechanical can undo you. You could get a swollen knee or weather, or like there's so many variables that can go wrong, which makes it more exciting because there's like all of these margins, then you have to have it kind of all come together. So there's no doubt if I hope I eventually fail at one of these crazy things, because if I never do, then I've never found that governor, whether that's luck. The governor can be luck. The governor can be my own body, but I can say definitively for myself that we're capable of so much more than we think that we can do. And so are all of us. Like, we are endurance machines. It's actually the only thing that we're good at as animals. Like, we're slow. We're not that strong compared to other animals. Like, we're really not. But we're endurance machines. We're the best animal in the world at it, right? So much better than we think that we can.
That's interesting.
But we're like, we evolved to be self-protective and to rest, right? Like that's what our evolution tells us to do. Unless you're being chased, you rest, right? And then you go fast and hard, or you migrate to find food and you go a long way. But otherwise, we're programmed to rest. Your body's going to tell you to stop because it sucks and it hurts. We can keep going.
To understand that and actually do it, or like.
They are two different things. So, and I knew it. So that's why I went from being like an endurance cyclist to like an ultra endurance cyclist. And there is a step there that I think is pretty clearly defined. But the process is the same. It is the same. And it does come down to just science, like the math. If you can stay awake and be safe, like I think that's really, really important. And I'm not willing to risk something that puts me so deep that I think I'm unsafe, like dangerous. Crashing on the descent or something like that, right? I'm not willing to do that. I've got people to answer to and take care of. But if you can keep finding a way to get 200 to 250 calories in your stomach every hour, you can keep going indefinitely.
It can work.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask you, starting 2 podcasts, I'd love to hear your thoughts around the why. Why to do it? Like
why podcasting?
Yeah. Why did you think that you had something, that you had a voice, I just want to hear your thought process, obviously, because I have mine. So I'm curious you've started 2 now. So I'm curious to see what
first of all, I love the medium. I love it. Like, so, I mean, I grew up, loved reading adventure stories, like Into Thin Air by John Krakauer, and like Alive about the Uruguayan soccer team. And like, I just love stories like that. And then podcasting is like.
You listen to podcasts?
Tons of podcasts. Yeah.
Really?
I'm almost always listening to a podcast.
No way.
Yeah. Lots.
I listen to 1 podcast.
Really?
That's it.
Oh, I listen to a bunch of podcasts. Yeah. I listen to yours now too.
Crazy.
Yeah. I listen to a bunch of podcasts. Yeah. I get a lot out of them. So, I mean, I loved the medium already.
Yep.
And then as it clearly became easier and easier and less, like more accessible to do.
Yep.
And we could do it remotely. And we had our challenges, like our audio sucked for months. And like you have such a sick setup here. Like we don't have that, but we've dialed in a lot of things. But I just loved it. But I had all the same normal insecurities that anybody else does. And I guess that's an important message to get out there for people. It's the same thing with Everesting or ultra cycling or anything else. It's like, I wonder if I can do it. Of course, I psych myself out and think like, is this stupid or should I do it? Yeah. I did that with the podcast too. I was like, nobody's going to care about this. Nobody's going to listen to it. But at some point you just got to, like, it's your life. Like, who cares if one person, like, if you don't want to listen to it, don't listen to it. Like it's, at some point you need to kind of get over yourself and your own insecurities. Cause I definitely had them. Even Tyler did too, who had a really successful cycling career. You know, it was like, I don't know. But then we started and it was like, and then we got great feedback. And then we had guests reach out after we talked to them and said, you guys are really good at that. Like, keep it up. And now I'm a listener. And it just kind of snowballed. I didn't know if we'd do 2 or 3 or if we'd keep rolling. And now I've done like 110.
No way.
Yeah, and like 10 Everesting podcasts so far. And I don't know if I could host anymore. I think I'm a little too
takes energy.
And busy. It does, yeah. Yeah, and you got to get up and research and like know what you're talking about with people. And
which is my trick. I don't do any research.
0. Think of all the time you're saving.
But here's the, at the root of the question is, you're a dude in Calgary.
Yeah.
An accomplished amateur cyclist. I don't know if that's a fair statement or not.
Yeah, I think that's probably the right way to say it. Okay. Accomplished, but definitely an amateur still.
Like,
yeah, totally.
You're not making money. You're not on a pro circuit. You're just a dude that loves it. That's doing something really awesome.
Totally.
And you decide that you can have a voice did you think did you want to be super niche? Did you know you needed to go there? Did you just know you could be a voice in something you're passionate about? Where is that?
Yeah, I think that's
almost the why, Like,
yeah, the why was, I guess I did. Maybe, so it's, again, back to how you can have conversations, or maybe I'm unique. I don't think I am. I think a lot of people do this. I talk myself into thinking, I'd be good at this. Like, I'm a good conversationalist. And I'm passionate about it. I know about it. And if you're hosting, you can put most of the work on your guest.
Dude, that's why I'm doing this.
If they're half interesting, all you need to do is like drop some carrots and some breadcrumbs and have them sort of follow a bit of a path.
Yep.
And then of course I could do it. And then it took pressure off to have a co-host because he is smart and well researched too, and has a lot of other interesting points. So we can kind of play off one another. And so I was like, you know what? It was a bit of a life is short thing. It was like,
interesting.
I won't regret trying, but I will regret not trying. And I know, again, that sounds corny, but corny things exist because they're true, right?
Yep.
Like, I would definitely have reservations and regrets about not having tried it versus trying it. And I'm so glad that I did because it's been super rewarding.
And at a level that surprised you?
Yeah, it's totally surprised me. It has. And we're actually, to answer your question, we're not that specific. That's why we called it Adventure Audio, and we don't have cycling in the name because we've interviewed some ultra runners.
Yep.
Mountaineers, like really interesting people. And we don't want to be like, we didn't want to preclude ourselves from having a conversation with Dean Karnassus or Laval Saint Germain or Scott Jurek, who's an ultra runner, just because, right? So we're like, we don't, like why would we pigeonhole ourselves that way? We thought, did that give us a little bit less opportunity commercially with like a cycling related sponsor or something? Maybe. But we're like, this isn't going to replace either of our full-time jobs. So let's make the podcast that we want to listen to, and whoever wants to listen to it will listen to it. Yeah. And it'll be what it'll be,
It's interesting. And do you find that, are you getting enough out of it to keep it going?
Yeah.
You're getting enough like personal satisfaction to kind of just keep the
Yeah, we have a little bit of sponsor support, so it is commercialized, but not like, again, it's not income
you're not Joe
replacement.
Rogan here.
No, not at all, not at all. And we're not even aspiring to be, but yeah, definitely getting enough out of it. And I've also gotten good enough at the back end, editing, publishing, all the post-production stuff, right? Getting it out on social media. I've gotten practice enough of that stuff that it's become easier and easier. So it's become almost a more rewarding experience because I have to pour a little less in to that. And we have a dedicated, like we try, but we're also not like, we've just put it out there and it gets the listens that it gets. And you can see where people are interested in. And
it's like tracking that damn book of yours, right? Like there's
I do. I look at who's downloading, what country is but isn't it amazing to scroll through and be like, somebody in Uruguay listens to our podcast?
Yeah,
what? It's so cool.
And I think the interesting thing that the questions I get right now about this show is just like, oh, how are you monetizing this? You making money? And the minute, no, I don't make any money off of this, and that's not the goal. I think if you do something you're passionate about, you put energy towards something, it becomes more than you think it's going to become. And then maybe you can monetize it then. But if that's the leader, if that's the direction you want to go out of the gate, I think it fails.
If that's your why?
Yeah.
Yeah. Especially on what should be a passion project or an art. It's an arts project. I mean, podcasting is art, conversations and art. If it's coming from a place of art, whether it's music or anything, if commercialization and dollars is like your motivator, first of all, I think it's pretty transparent. And secondly, I think you'd burn out on it pretty fast.
I think you're right. I think that's an interesting lesson. I think because not everybody, everyone can't do this. Everyone can't be a host. Everyone can't have a voice. They can. But sometimes you don't have the DNA to actually pull it off.
Totally.
To look at a podcast as thinking about the art or the create like a conversation versus how do I shine more light on myself? Not everyone can think like that, which I think then all the ones that can think like that, they last longer. There's some runway there.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah. And there's so many, it's so cool. There's so many ways to tell stories. You can have a YouTube channel. You can be some sort of content creator, right? And you can find fans all over the world.
Yep.
It's so neat, right? Like I've got from just people that we've interviewed, there's so many places in North America or in Europe that I could go to and literally text somebody and meet up for a bike ride. Like people that that's so cool.
Did you think that would happen?
We live in? No.
Isn't that crazy though?
It's amazing.
When all of a sudden when you come up with a show idea and all of a sudden you're surrounded by like-minded people, then your world, you cannot believe there's these kind of people all over the world that think like you. You're like, oh, I'm not weird.
Totally. And did this happen to you? This happened to us. We were like, we're going to run out of people to talk to really fast. Like that happened to us. Now it's the complete opposite. I'm like, we could do a podcast every day.
Yeah.
We'd never run out of people to talk to. We want to talk to outdoorsy, inspiring people who are pushing limits. We'll never run out of people.
How did that happen though? The minute you started thinking like that was, I'm guessing, you're almost getting to the edge of your network. And you're like, I don't know. Like, how deep can we go? And then what happened?
Recommendations.
Yeah, from people that were on the show.
Totally.
Which is exactly why you and I are here.
Yeah, you should talk to this person, or you should talk to that person, and then that snowballs, and it's so cool.
Did you know that was going to be a possible outcome from doing the show?
I knew, I intellectually knew that, right? Like
you knew the network was going to go.
Yeah, I'm old enough to know that that's how networks work, but I still didn't have the confidence or belief that it would really work for us yet.
Well, because I think the only way it works is if you're good.
I guess so.
If you were a shitty host, if the show sucked, if the conversation sucked, that referral, just like in business, right? If you're shitty at what you do,
I didn't even think of that. You're right.
The referral thing kind of stops at a certain point.
So like, whew, got through that, and then
it's dead.
They never think about it again. Yeah, that's a great point.
It's really interesting to see what happens, and the reason I'm kind of on this with you right now is because I like to talk to people about hosting a party. Host a party, host a podcast. If you're trying to do anything, if you're trying to grow something, hosting a party, everything starts growing. Your network grows. It's the perfect idea for business, for personal enjoyment. There's something in you though, right? Like not everyone can sit in front of a camera on a mic and host this thing. Like there's something different about doing this.
Yeah, I mean, I think you do. It's funny. I don't like I hate editing the podcast because I have to listen to myself
totally.
so much.
Totally.
It's the worst, right?
Yeah.
But I love talking. I hate listening to myself, but I love to talk, obviously. So yeah, I mean, you need to know that it's something that you could continue to do, right? I guess that's important because there's so many, like, have you delved into like podcast stats? I know they're sort of ambiguous and hard to get, but so many podcasts start and fizzle right out. So many podcasts get no downloads. You don't.
Why do you think those scenarios happen?
I think that people want to. I think like the joke that everybody has a podcast. Well, probably not everybody should have a podcast. Some of them just aren't very good because they weren't very well thought out. And then other people quit just because they're quitters. Like,
it's work. This
it is work.
To pull this off is dead work, and it takes hours to do it, which takes hours away from family, from cycling, from work, whatever. So it's
everything. It's work, and a lot of people quit as soon as they meet any kind of adversity. That doesn't matter if it's on a bike ride or a trail or work or starting a podcast or hobby business or what, like, like when I started the bike shows and stuff like that, like that was a side hustle before side hustles were cool, right? Like, and this is too, whether you're monetizing it immediately or not. And if you aren't like committed to seeing some things through and battling through a little bit of adversity, like as soon as we had somebody email us and say, hey, kind of like the show, but your audio sucks, I could have shriveled up and quit or like, you know what I mean? But where do you get some people just need a little bit of resilience to push through. And as soon as, I don't know if this happened for you, but as soon as we could see that our numbers were more than the people that we immediately knew were listening, like I can't name those people. Like that's my brother and my mom downloading the podcast. Yeah. It was really encouraging. You're like, that's a big enough number that I don't know a bunch of those people. That's pretty cool, right?
Yeah, I think the stats are eventually maybe important when you're going to monetize it. If you want to do something with it, what I find is if you come up with a show idea, as long as you're passionate about it, and that passion can just keep the energy going, and it allows you to keep working at it, and then you start it up.
Totally.
And then the only wild card then is, do you have the chops or the personality to pull it off?
Yeah. And it's better to have a core group of fans probably than
like a market.
Yeah, totally. Yep. And a niche. Like it doesn't need to be big for it to be rewarding and to keep going. And now I get and I totally underestimated how rewarding it would be to get an email saying, I'm going to plan an Everesting because you inspired the shit out of me. I can't believe it. Like father of 3, super busy, figured out a way to do this, figured out the training, like to have people that I've never met, total strangers, reach out and tell me things like that. Like
wild.
So cool. Totally underestimated how cool and powerful that is.
When you think back to, that Golden Triangle, the first one, if that was the first big
That was the first big multi-day ride I did. Yeah.
And now all of a sudden you have a voice in the industry. Mindfuck, is it weird?
Yes.
Like it's
totally. And again, an insecurity thing too. It's like, well, I don't I'm not a partner at BowCycle like Kurt, and I didn't race my bike professionally. But then it's like, you know what? Cycling doesn't belong to people who own bike shops or who raced in the World Tour. Yeah. Or any whatever your thing is, right? Whether that's music or whatever, you don't need to have been on the cover of Rolling Stone to have a voice in music or to care about it or to know about it or to talk about it. So I had to kind of get over that a little bit and been like, you know what? I do have lots to contribute. I've done some big stuff and I care and I like to try and be an ambassador for the sport too, right? And encourage other people to do it. Whether it doesn't matter what your big year is. It could be just getting off the couch.
It could be
riding 5,000.
It could be 100 clicks.
It could be 100 clicks. It could be finally doing a 100K ride. It could be any of those things, right? So, but yeah, it's a bit of a mindfuck. Yeah. It is.
And I think what's really cool, I think the shows that, again, I only listen to one podcast. It's a water ski podcast with my buddy Trent.
That's the one podcast you listen to.
That's it.
Okay.
So, but what I think what happens is it's just, there's a bunch of variables that make a good show. And I think if you come at it from an angle of you have this objective that you want to get to, I think there's more opportunity to fail. I want to be a voice in the industry. I want to hit 5,000 downloads.
Right.
I think setting yourself up with those goals for a podcast, you'll fail because the minute it gets hard, you're jumping out. I think it sounds like our approach is very similar. Passionate about something, like to talk about things we like talking about. And all of a sudden the machine just gets going. And what happens is just mind altering when you have these.
Totally.
It's when I got to sit down with Laval, it was a great one. Katrina LeMay Doan. Like these people
So
are
cool.
way above my pay grade.
Like I was a little kid when Katrina LeMay Doan was winning gold medals.
Owning
and,
it.
like she was such a big deal.
So then it just opens the doors. So I think it's very interesting when you're doing something good. It just, the spider web just grows.
It's the coolest thing. Like it's magical, and we don't like what a time we live in, right? Like, and my kids get to grow up in this time. Like they're gonna have resources that are, you know, it's unbelievable.
Would it be interesting to see as your kids listen to what you're up to, if when they get to a certain age, do they feel more inclined they too can have a voice in a community?
Yes, I already can see that in them, and that makes me really happy. Even if it's and like. The cycling and the ultra endurance bug hasn't bit any of them yet. They're pretty young, and I don't even care if it ever does. But it could be like my daughter's a dancer. I mean, why couldn't she have a podcast about dancing if that's what she wanted to do in a couple of years? Like she could be a teenager and do that. Like, what, you know, like why not? Of course you can. There's free apps to do it. Like it's such a cool creative outlet. But for goal setting, I think is very important I think goal setting is wildly important. But they don't need to be so tangible with an art. Like you said, like it doesn't need to be 5,000 downloads. If you want to buy a condo in Hawaii and it costs $1 million, you can't be like it's $1 million. You can't.
Yeah.
That's a very, very defined goal.
Yeah.
Business goals, sales metrics, like those have to be defined. If you're like, I'm going to dedicate some of my spare time to this, putting a hard number on it like that is just like soul sucking. Like that takes the fun out of it. It's not why we do it, right?
Totally.
Yeah. Yeah. So we said we'd do it as long as we had fun, and we're having a blast.
It's cool. Yeah. Do you have bandwidth to do a third show?
I hope if my wife listens to this, she's going to be like, no, he doesn't. I don't know. I probably have some bandwidth to help some other shows out, and maybe
co-pilot,
almost like maybe co-pilot a little bit, or even help distribute or like figure out some of those pieces, and maybe fill in some of the blanks that we don't necessarily get into, like in terms of like bike tech or like training, because we don't specifically get too deep into those things on the podcast on purpose. It's more conversational. It's more like about like the
stories,
human spirit, stories, and inspiration. And right?
That's what people listen to, right?
Yeah.
Google, they can figure out some technical things.
Right. But if that at some point grew into a little bit more of like a network where there was like more niches below it, I could see that. It's part of my personality to wonder about growing things or where something can go. Right. Doesn't matter what I do.
It's cool, man. This has been a cool chat.
Thanks, man.
You'll be surprised how long we've been chatting, but
I feel like we've been talking for like 20 minutes.
I know it's almost an hour and a quarter.
Is it really?
Yeah.
Wow.
So super cool. Again, thanks to Laval for hooking us up.
Yeah, huge shout out to Laval.
Yeah.
He's the man.
I only ask one question. When I say Calgary, where's your head go?
Because I've listened to the podcast, I knew that was coming, and it's maybe a little bit of a cliche answer. People have beat me to it, but I definitely think about the mountains is one thing.
Yep.
I also think about Calgary has a personality to it, and it's not always the best, but it serves it really, really well. Calgary is like one of my favorite podcasters sports podcasters. He talks about athletes having irrational confidence, where they almost think that they're better than they are, but it somehow serves them well because they just don't believe they could ever not be successful.
Yep.
Calgary's kind of like that. Calgary kind of has like this swagger. And I kind of love that about my city. It's very, very resilient. We've been kicked around a whole bunch for a whole bunch of different reasons. And I know a lot of places do that happens. The energy industry, there's a lot of reasons for it.
Yep.
But Calgary's super, super resilient. We have irrational confidence as a city, and we just believe we'll be okay. And we just have swagger. And I love that about Calgary.
That's a cool way to phrase it.
Yeah.
Super cool. I'll probably clip it and you'll see yourself saying that exactly. Yeah. Thanks for taking the time. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for doing this, man. I appreciate it.
Cool.